Invasive Species, Ecosystem Services, and Human Well-Being by Group 1, Patrick, Cruz, Jasmine, Ethan, Sam, and Darren. What are invasive alien species, also known as IAS? Invasive alien species are non-native species that threaten an ecosystem, habitats, or other species. A lot of the time, the introduction of a non-native invasive species results in ecological, environmental, and/or economic damage to that environment. Invasive species can be beneficial in some areas and negatively impactful in other areas. These species usually have rapid reproduction and spread unintentionally with the trade of goods and resources we use or see every day, or even simple tasks like watering plants.
So here are some costs of invasive species. The U.S. spends more than $120 billion every year on invasive species damage control. Some invasive species affect the provisioning of populations, such as the food, fiber, or fuel. They can also affect the regulation or the regulating of normal values, such as climate or soil stability. They can also affect the cultural services, which is tourism, general beauty, and other cultural norms. So let me give you some quick examples. The cattle versus yellow star thistle. Yellow star thistle is an invasive species in California, and the cattle there eat on this yellow star thistle, and this yellow star thistle is unpalatable to cows. And so they gain no sustenance, which lowers the price of cattle and creates a less beefier cow. And the coqui frog, which is a frog native to Puerto Rico was introduced into Hawaii. This frog has a really, really loud mating call. And so this mating call can cause problems, and it actually decreases the prices of houses within the area of a large population of coqui frog.
In this slide, I will be going over the benefits of invasive species. There are rare occurrences of IAS benefiting the ecosystem or human society in provisioning, regulating, and cultural services. The first example is the brush-tailed possum. The brush-tailed possum came to New Zealand and resulted in mass defoliation. And defoliation is the separation of ripened leaves from a branch or stem. So that's not good for the ecosystem. But it was highly profitable for the eco-friendly fur industry, and that was 20 million US dollars per year in exports. So that's why it's good for the economy. Now, for regulating, we have the zebra mussel. It is the poster child for an effective biological filtration machine. Filtration machines help clear the water and make it more drinkable. And so this was just an example of it helping instead of just completely hurting. And then for cultural, the impact of invasive alien species on cultural services is measured by its attributes that are non-consumptive. And non-consumptive means the value for recreational, tourism, history, education, science, spirituality, and aesthetics, all that. And this differs based on personal and local value systems, so it's not the same everywhere. And then finally, the example for that would be ornamental benefits. People in plant shops raise these IAS plants and they look good, and consumers want to buy them for their houses. And it just helps the aesthetic, and they hold value for them there. And that's it.
There are many synergies and trade-offs with invasive species, and these can be seen in 3 case studies from South Africa, the Great Lakes, and Hawaii. So in South Africa, there were woody invasive species, which are tree and species that you can see on the slide. So some ways that they helped the South Africa was that they helped industry. They generated hundreds of millions of dollars in foresting and wooding industries and fuel, but they also ruin the ecosystem by causing large amounts of erosion, and they hurt ecotourism. So in the Great Lakes, the zebra mussels were great water filters, but they also competed with food for local fish species, which hurt them, and they caused avian botulism through buildup of lead, and then the birds would eat the mollusk and get sick. So they also hurt the fishing tourism because they cause cyanobacteria blooms. So in Hawaii, the feral pigs damage crops, but they also provided food for the locals. They caused a lot of erosion by eating plant roots that kept the soil together, and they also increased disease by being a breeding ground for mosquitoes. According to the National Invasive Species Information Center, there are 3 ways to control invasive species. These are chemical control, which is using herbicides and pesticides to kill invasive species; biological control, which is manipulating and introducing natural predators to an invasive species in order to whittle its population down; and mechanical, which is going out and removing invasive species by mowing, hand pulling, and cultivating.
In conclusion, invasive species can be both beneficial and harmful. An example of this is the Hawaiian feral pigs. They provide hunting opportunities to both tourists and locals, as well as preventing erosion around the island. At the same time, they are harmful by enhancing mosquito breeding and ravaging crops. Invasive species can cost the local population lots of money and be difficult to deal with. An example of this is salt cedar. Salt cedar consumes a lot of water in the southwestern part of the U.S., causing $26 to $67 million of water to be lost annually. There are ways to combat invasive species. There are chemical control, biological control, and mechanical control as methods to contain invasive species. Invasive species have their pros and cons, but humanity now has the responsibility to control and use them properly.